It's Real Talk with Dr. David Anderson. I'm Tony Penny filling in for Dr. Anderson today. We're talking about toxic relationships. Let's go.
Live from our nation's capital, welcome to Real Talk with Dr. David Anderson. An expert on race, religion, and relationships, Dr. Anderson wants to talk to you. Our phone lines are now open. 888-432-7434. And now, please welcome Dr. David Anderson, your bridge-building voice in the nation's capital.
Well, not quite, Dr. David Anderson. I'm Tony Penny, assistant producer, filling in for Dr. Anderson. If you follow him on social media, you know he is a little bit under the weather these days. So I'm going to be filling in for him this week, maybe next week as well. We'll see how he's doing. Lord willing, he will be back here next week live on the air. We'll see what happens with that. But today, I'm filling in, and it's the first live show that we have had in the month of April, and it's the first live show we've had since the slap heard round the world. You all know what I'm talking about, unless you've been living under a rock. You heard about Will Smith smacking Chris Rock live on stage at the Academy Awards at the end of March because Chris Rock had made a inappropriate but rather benign joke about Will's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, and her hair loss. And that just set the world afire for really the better part of the next week. And was he right? Was he wrong? Was it toxic masculinity? Is it a toxic relationship? What was the deal? So we're not necessarily going to delve too much into Will and Jada and Chris today, but we are going to talk a little bit about relationships. Now, if you're new to the show, if you're just joining us, this is how we roll. If you know it, you can say it with me. We have Marriage Monday, we have Tough Topic Tuesday, Wisdom Wednesday, Theological Thursday, and Open Phone In Friday. Anything you want to talk about on Open Phone In Friday is fair game. But today is Tough Topic Tuesday, and we're going to talk a little bit about relationships. Now, some of what we talk about today may be a little bit of a trigger for you, so you may want to, use some caution and discernment as you listened. And if you feel like calling in, by all means, please do. 888-432-7434 is our number. You can also visit us at Facebook on Dr. Anderson's page. You can go to our YouTube channel as well. Leave a comment. We'll be monitoring those throughout the show and trying to interact with you there and maybe even bring up your questions on the air. But before we do anything, let's go to the one who has all the answers. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for today and this opportunity that you've given us, this table that you've set before us where we can have good conversation, civil conversation, and necessary conversations about the things in life that matter to us, about race, about religion, about relationships. We ask that you be with us for this hour and guard our speech and open ears and hearts and minds to what we have to talk about. We ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, again, it's Tough Topic Tuesday. Today's topic, love makes you do stupid things. Have you ever done something crazy in the name of love? Have you ever been in a toxic relationship? And if you have been, how did you know you were in a toxic relationship, and what did you do? Did you get out of it? Are you in a toxic relationship right now? Maybe you think you might be, but you're not entirely sure. Well, I've got some help today. I had to call in the big guns. Joining me today is Aishia Grevenberg. She's a licensed clinical social worker operating out of Las Vegas, Nevada. She is a dynamic mental health professional with over 15 years of professional service and experience to undervalued populations, particularly women and people of color. She's a pioneer in the mental health field. She shaped the professional foundation of hundreds of counseling graduate students at UNLV. As a college professor, she finds it an honor and responsibility, as well as a call to service that she answers with unparalleled enthusiasm. She's crafted her own therapeutic philosophy, which says each person has within everything needed to live an inspired life. She currently practices in Las Vegas, Nevada. She's the proud mother of her rambunctious dog, Sage, and her cat, Lyric. She enjoys vegan food, hip-hop, and traveling, and we are so happy to have her on Real Talk with Dr. David Anderson. Aishia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a super cool introduction.
I bet you haven't had an introduction that began with prayer for a while in an interview, right?
Right. But it was good. It felt really good. So thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. How did you get into the field of social work and private practice and therapy?
Well, I've actually been in the field. I love saying this, Tony, for 20 years. Wow. 20 years I've been a social worker. Mm-hmm. So I got my master's degree from Boston University in 2002. You see that, 2002.
Right.
I was 24 years old, and that's when I got my master's degree. I actually decided to become a therapist when I was maybe 10, maybe 8 or 10.
Really?
I talk about this a lot. Yep, I grew up in Trenton, New Jersey, and I grew up in the middle of the crack epidemic and mass incarceration. Mm-hmm. In the middle. And I lived in a row house in New Jersey. And so if you know about row houses, it's one block, all the houses are connected, right?
Yeah.
And my house was connected to a crack house.
Oh.
And the walls are paper thin. They're paper thin in these communities, right?
Yeah.
And I remember every house on the block was impacted by crack. Every single house, either using it or selling it. And my brother was selling it. And so we lived next to a crack house. My brother's selling crack. And I just saw so much compassion because I knew as Black people, because I was told we don't talk about what goes on in this house. Mm-hmm. You don't tell nobody nothing. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, don't say nothing to nobody. Keep your mouth shut. You know, I'm a Gen X. Don't open the door for nobody. You come home from school, you sit down, you watch this TV, do your homework. Mm-hmm. And so I just saw people struggling, and I said, my God, but who do they have to talk to about this pain and this shame? And I don't know, I was a serious kid. You know what I mean? I was 8. I said, I'm going to be that person. And here I am.
Yeah, I think
37 years later.
At 8, 9, 10 years old, if that's your mindset, you're definitely serious and sort of an old soul, as they say, right?
Yes, I would do this no matter what. It's just who I am.
It's your calling.
People talk to me all the time. Yeah, it is. It's on my spirit. And it's just what I do.
Wow. And does your practice focus much on couples or individuals, and how does that work exactly?
So I've had a lot of experience. So I started doing clinical work within the past 10 years. Mm-hmm. 10 years prior to that, I did what most people would consider traditional social work, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I went out into people's homes. I worked with children. I worked in hotels. I had a lot of families that were in child protective services. So I would do therapy in cancer centers all over Las Vegas. And in my private practice, I focus primarily on individuals that have a history of trauma. And because of that early childhood trauma, they're more vulnerable to being in toxic relationships. And so that's really the bulk of what I do. I did work with couples, but I stopped. Let me tell you why I stopped. Most of the time, I'm going to say over 90% of the time, when they came to see me, the relationship was over.
Right.
And the therapy should have happened years ago. And they're done, but one person says, okay, well, let's just try therapy. And then they come into therapy when there's so much resentment and bitterness. It was just really difficult to work through that for me in my practice.
When we come back from this commercial break, we're going to talk a little bit about Will and Chris and Jada, but we're really going to dive into toxic relationships, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and what you can do to get help. It's Real Talk with Dr. David Anderson. We'll be right back.
Hey, have you gotten your COVID vaccine yet?
No, I'm not sure about how safe that is.
Really? All of the COVID vaccines are safe, effective, and approved by the CDC and the FDA.
Yeah, but I already had COVID. I should be safe.
Not necessarily. Even if you've had it, you can still get COVID again.
Okay, but I think I'll just wait a while and see what happens long term to people who took the vaccine. They rushed that too fast for me.
I know it seems that way, but they really weren't rushed. They've gone through robust trials with all kinds of people, and over 200 million Americans have taken the vaccine. It's safe.
Well, what about infertility? I heard the vaccine can cause you not to be able to have children.
Not true. There's absolutely no evidence that the COVID-19 vaccine can cause infertility. You'll be fine.
Well, you've convinced me. Let's go get my vaccine.
Prince George's County, get vaccinated and get your booster shot so we can all be proud to be protected.
Have you ever listened to Real Talk with Dr. David Anderson and wondered how we come up with heartfelt discussions on Marriage Mondays or engaging topics on Tough Topic Tuesdays? Well, our listeners are our inspiration. We would love to keep hearing from you. So if you have an idea for the show, let us know, because comprehension begins with conversation. Send us your ideas by sending an email to info@andersonspeaks.com and join the conversation on Real Talk with Dr. David Anderson.
Welcome back to Real Talk with Dr. David Anderson. For more information about this program or for resources from Dr. Anderson, please visit andersonspeaks.com. To watch on Facebook Live or to view past episodes, visit Dr. Anderson's public figure Facebook page. Just search Dr. David Anderson and click like. You can also watch live on YouTube. Just search for Anderson Speaks, all one word, and make sure to subscribe. Join our text community and receive a free weekly textpiration from Dr. Anderson. Just text the word INSPIRE to 97000. That's INSPIRE to 97000. And now, back to Real Talk with Dr. David Anderson. Welcome back to Tough Topic Tuesday on Real Talk with Dr. David Anderson. I'm Tony Penny, assistant producer, filling in for Dr. Anderson, who's a little under the weather. Please keep him in your prayers. It's Tough Topic Tuesday, and we're talking about toxic relationships. Love makes you do crazy things. Have you done something crazy for love? Have you been in a toxic relationship before? Maybe you're in one now, or you think that you might be. Give us a call, 888-432-7434 is the number. Aishia Grevenberg is my guest today. She's a licensed clinical social worker and therapist in private practice out in Las Vegas. And if you didn't know, a couple weeks ago, the Academy Awards were on, and it got a little interesting. Chris Rock made a joke about Jada Pinkett Smith's hair. That didn't sit well with Will Smith, her husband. And so he took it upon himself to get up on stage and smack Chris Rock right across the face. Not an hour later, Will accepted the award for Best Actor. And this is what he had to say as soon as he got up.
Art imitates life. I look like the crazy father, just like they said. I look like crazy father, just like they said about Richard Williams. But love will make you do crazy things.
Love will make you do crazy things. Now, Aishia, you saw that. I know you had some comments. I've seen your videos on TikTok talking about it. But for our audience, what were your thoughts immediately after, and then after you've kind of given it some thought?
Initially, I have to tell you, my best friend texted me. I didn't even know the Oscars were on, right? So
Right.
My best friend texted me, and she says, Will Smith slapped Chris Rock. Now, I'm a Chris Rock fan, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I've been a Chris Rock fan for over 30 years. And I've seen him live, love Chris Rock. I see the slap, and when I tell you I had a physical reaction, like I jumped because I'm a survivor of domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that he walked up there was so calm, and then that level of violence. And then the way he walked back and sat down, and I watched it again where he kind of like pops his collar and he's screaming and cursing, and he just kind of sits there. And it was such a trigger. it was such a trigger because it's like, who is Will Smith?
Mm-hmm.
Like but when you are in an abusive relationship or a toxic relationship, the person changes like that as well, where they could, they're the life of the party. Everyone knows who they are. They're handsome, funny, but then they can also switch and become this yelling, violent person with very little provocation. The joke was extremely mild. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Extremely mild, but the slightest provocation can elicit that type of response. So I was definitely triggered. So Aishia responded, not like therapist Aishia, and Aishia was definitely triggered.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had just turned the Oscars off, and a friend of mine texted me and said, "What just happened at the Academy Awards?" And I'm like, "Well, let me get back on Hulu and rewind and see what went down." And when I saw it, my immediate response, before Will even sat back down, was, "This is a bit. This is something that they scripted for some reason." But at that point, they had cut the audio for several seconds, and you could see Will screaming from his seat. And then, later you got the unedited feeds internationally that you heard exactly what he said and how he said it. And I know I heard in his voice a level of anger, but also a level of pain that in a way I identified with, because I've been that angry and I've been that hurt. So I knew it wasn't fake. And Chris Rock's response to that let me know that it wasn't fake at all. But like you, I was triggered and I could not go to sleep for hours after that. And, I don't know Will or Jada or Chris. They're, international celebrities. They're people that I don't come into contact with. But I felt kind of traumatized by it, to tell you the truth. Do you think do you think that was a result of toxic masculinity, a toxic relationship, or both?
So I'm going to say that it was both. And the reason that let's start with the toxic masculinity. So I'm just going to assume that the two of them know each other, that they have a familiarity based on the number of years they've both been in the business, and they're both pretty much in a very similar business, sitcom, comedy, the whole 9 yards.
And Chris Rock appeared on Fresh Prince back in the day, at least once. So, yeah, they know each other. Yeah.
They know each other. And so when he walked up to him, Chris Rock wasn't in a protective stance. In fact, he had his hands behind his back.
Yeah.
And so he didn't feel uncomfortable or threatened or anything. He just thought, he knows this dude, he's coming up, whisper something in his ear, whatever have you. And the violence of it, the idea that could not have been handled a different way at a different time, is such this toxic display of what a man is and what a man does. And that type of reaction is so inappropriate and so over the top with violence. And that's why I'm leaning into the toxic masculinity and the relationship dynamic between Jada and Will. I try to avoid everything that has to do with those two. They are just too much. And I even think that is problematic because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of boundaries in their relationship where things stay private. Like there are things you keep between you and your partner, and it's not something that you talk about constantly. And so the lack of boundaries lends itself to there being a level of toxicity there as well.
Yeah, they have put their relationship right out there for everybody to see for years now. And certainly since Jada has been doing Red Table Talk, we know way more about their marriage than we probably should know. This is information that really should stay behind closed doors. We're not going to talk about what happens in our home for the entire world to see, but we know what the dynamic is in that marriage because they've let us know very openly, very publicly. So let's kind of define terms here. What exactly is a toxic relationship?
When I work with clients, I'm very careful of language because language conveys so much meaning. So a toxic relationship takes on different manifestations. The primary concern is that one person is being abused, neglected, and or manipulated. And so it's a relationship where there is an unequal power dynamic. It's a relationship where one person's needs are not being met. And there's also this dynamic of being shut down when you try to express emotions or feelings. So there's this disproportionate amount of control as well. So toxic relationships are very controlling. They have the power imbalance. And you have a person, there's typically one person that they're not getting their needs met.
And is that necessarily the person that is toxic, or is that the person who's being manipulated, abused, or neglected?
You know, it actually can go both ways. So and I work with both sides of the coin. So I work with victims, identified victims, and perpetrators as well. And there is no such thing as a perfect victim, as a person that's saying, you know, I have no role in this whatsoever. That's not reality. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So there are times where you get into a relationship, something goes sideways, you don't like it, you're out. When the person is staying in the relationship, once they've identified it's toxic and their needs aren't being met, they definitely play a role in that. And I think that's hard for a lot of victims to hear, that they are playing a role in the things that are happening to them, but they are.
So they're sort of enabling that behavior in a way, right?
Yes. And there are a lot of reasons for that can be physiological, psychological, that plays into that, right? Our bonding and the way we bond and interact with people. So there's a lot of trauma bonding that happens in toxic relationships, but that doesn't negate the responsibility of self-preservation. You don't ever lose that responsibility in any relationship, but that's a really hard pill to swallow.
So is violence necessarily a hallmark of a toxic relationship? Is there always violence in those kinds of relationships, or can it be something else?
So violence is definitely what you will see, but not every toxic relationship has physical violence. And so there could be financial abuse. I know plenty of women that have ruined their credit, putting their name on somebody's car, getting a loan for someone, putting someone on their credit card. That's financial abuse. So did that person harm you? No. But they've tainted your credit for the next 10 years.
Wow.
And so that's abuse. When you think about I don't always want to say the perpetrator is a male, but if a woman is tearing a man down and calling him names, you ain't this, you ain't that, you can't do this, you can't do that, that does weigh on someone. And men carry that type of negative criticism with them for years.
Right.
They don't talk about it. They won't go to therapy, but they will carry that shame around. And it doesn't look like shame. It looks like anger.
Right. And do you think, to a certain degree, maybe that's what we saw that night? We saw sort of an outworking of any sort of inner shame that he might be carrying based on even something within their marriage that they've divulged over the past few years?
I'm confident in that. And what we saw was a performance of masculinity. That wasn't masculinity. That was a performance. And it is from someone who's truly confused about what true masculinity is. So masculinity is cooperation. It's authority that doesn't require the announcement of authority. You know when you're in the presence of a man.
Right.
You know that.
Right.
Because he takes care of everything.
Right.
And everyone feels safe. Everyone feels safe because that is what masculinity is: safety, protection, and provision. And so you instantly feel safe because you know this person will protect everyone, not just you. And so the confusion is what was problematic.
888-432-7434. We're talking about toxic relationships on this Tough Topic Tuesday. I'm joined by Aishia Grevenberg, a therapist and licensed clinical social worker. We'll be right back after this with your calls. Welcome back to Tough Topic Tuesday here on Real Talk with Dr. David Anderson. I'm Tony Penny, assistant producer of Real Talk, filling in for Dr. Anderson this week. He's a little under the weather. If you follow him on social media, you know he's been dealing with some health challenges, and we want you to keep him in your prayers and your thoughts and your positive vibes his way. We could really appreciate it. And Lord willing, he will be back here very soon, right here behind the mic. But today it's Tough Topic Tuesday. We're talking about toxic relationships with Aishia Grevenberg, a licensed clinical social worker and therapist in private practice out in Las Vegas, Nevada. Aishia, there was a divided, polarizing sort of response to what happened between Will Smith and Chris Rock. With some people saying Will was perfectly within his right to protect his wife in that way. Others saying, no, that's the kind of things that unfortunately get men, especially black men, killed out in the streets. What did you make of the divided response that people had to what we saw?
I started to think it was generational because I saw a lot of people my age, I'm 44, saying, okay, that was totally inappropriate. That wasn't the time nor the place. In fact, that was the biggest night of his life, of his acting career. The biggest night. You don't get bigger than the Oscars. There's nothing else, right? That's the top. This is the biggest night of his life. Not just him, but every person that was nominated. The biggest moment for them. And so to think that that is the time to have an emotional outburst is totally inappropriate. And so I was blown away that people were co-signing his behavior. And then when Jada came out and said, okay, that's not what I wanted, and he exaggerated, it's crickets.
Yeah.
Crickets.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Crickets. And it just blew my mind. And it also blew my mind that someone would think that's an appropriate response to a joke from a comedian.
And there have been much harsher things said about celebrities at other award shows. I mean, Ricky Gervais is known for being, utterly devastating in some of the things that he says about celebrities. So by comparison, that was nothing. Now, one of our commenters on Facebook said, it's not a minor joke to somebody who is dealing with alopecia. And I would agree. I'm just not convinced that Chris knew she had alopecia in the first place. But do you think that because of this sort of polarizing response to what Chris or to what Will did, do you think that the media and sort of the media that we consume on a regular basis, maybe even especially the media that women consume, sort of pushes them into one corner that says, yes, he stood up for his queen, he protected her? Because I think that, and I'm Gen X as well, so we grew up kind of learning about men protecting their wives, and you stand up for your wife and your family and your woman and what have you, and whether it was in movies or music or stories, what have you. Do you think that fed into some of that idea?
I definitely think that media plays a role. However, and I think media in a different way. So the narrative around Black women in media is so degrading and so dehumanizing and so woefully just inappropriate and hurtful and harmful. So this dialogue about Black women aren't worthy of marriage, Black women aren't feminine enough, they're not pretty, like just this constant degradation that Black women are experiencing in media, to the degree of feeling so invalidated and unwanted that type of over-the-top display is almost like the antidote to those feelings of inadequacy that are being sort of forced upon Black women. And so I think that is the response, where someone is so hurt and feels so rejected and so set aside that someone can say, the biggest night of my life, I'm going to step up and I'm going to do something about this, right? And so it actually made me sad to think of how someone must feel in order to see that as appropriate. Wow. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely,
like that sort of shame and that sort of feeling invisible, that is what it would take for you to feel loved, which is truly frightening.
888-432-7434 is our number. If you've been in a toxic relationship, if you are in a toxic relationship, we want to hear from you. Give us a call, 888-43-BRIDGE. Now, in the time that you did spend in counseling couples, how often or how frequently were the husbands or the men in the relationship sort of the ones that needed to change? Because one of the things I've always heard is if men change, if husbands change, then everything changes.
I'll give you an example of my most favorite couple. I love these two. When I poured into them, you understand what I'm saying to you? When you pour into, I poured into them. When I tell you they were young, they would come to my office cussing, screaming, when I say hollering at each other.
Right.
And at one point, I separated them, and I said to the wife, I said, listen, sis, you can't talk to him like this. You just can't. You can't talk to him like this. You can't. This is not, you're not going to get what you want treating him this way and calling him names. This is not okay. And I need you to hear it from me as a woman. I'm definitely your therapist, but I'm a grown woman, and I'm telling you, you cannot talk to him this way.
Wow.
And that worked.
Wow.
And that worked.
Okay.
And when I talked to the man, I pulled the husband aside. I said, look, you are the head of this home. This is the structure that y'all have. Y'all have established a structure. If you're the head of this home, then the constant reaction, that's not okay.
Yeah.
It's not okay. You can't react to everything that's being said. You can't. Being the head of the household means, go ahead.
When we come back from this break, I want to talk a little bit about shame and trauma as it relates to toxic relationships. It's Real Talk with Dr. David Anderson.
Waterproof Tired of living in that smelly basement? Well, let me tell you something. Amber and I had some basement issues. We called Best Buy Waterproofing. They came and they helped us out. If you have mold, mildew, cracks, blistered paint in your walls, or you're just not quite sure if your basement is altogether safe, then call Best Buy Waterproofing. Just go to bestbuywaterproofing.com. They have over 30 years of experience, and they'll even donate $500 to my show if you end up doing business with them. But most of all, get your basement fixed. Give them a call, 844-980-3707. That's 844-980-3707.
Best Buy Waterproofing before the water rises.
Hey, Rebecca, have your kids gotten their vaccine yet?
No, not yet, Dr. Evans. I'm not sure it's safe for them.
You have 2 teenagers and a 4-year-old, right?
Yeah, 13 and 15.
Perfect. The vaccines are totally safe for kids 5 to 17. The CDC and FDA have approved them.
But kids don't really get COVID, right? Or if they do, it's mild.
No, more and more kids are getting COVID, and if they're not vaccinated, they could wind up in the hospital or with some bad long-term complications.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Your child is more at risk for short-term and long-term health issues from a COVID infection than a vaccine.
Wow, I didn't know that. What about boosters for my kids? Should they get those too?
Yes, but no sooner than 5 months after their second dose of the vaccine.
Can my 4-year-old get a vaccine?
No, not yet. It's just for kids 5 to 17 years of age.
Thanks, Doc. I appreciate the info.
Anytime. That's what I'm here for. Prince George's County, get vaccinated and get your booster shot so we can all be proud to be protected.
Have you ever driven through neighborhoods and seen beautiful uplights? You know what uplights are? They're when they shine the light on the trees, they shine the light on the house, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. Well, guess what? During the winter months, Laser Landscaping are doing lights for your house. And they're not only doing lights on the outside, they're also doing hearth work. So if you're looking for nice patios and things of that sort, where you walk off the back of your patio and you just see how beautiful it can be in the spring, well, they're doing the work during the winter. So give them a call directly. It's Laser with a Z, laserlandscaping.llc. You can find them at 240-516-4967. Ask for Fidel. Laser Landscaping LLC. Ask for Fidel. Here's the number again, 240-516-4967, and he's zeroing in his company to give special deals today for Bowie, Maryland. That's right, Bowie, Mitchellville, Greenbelt, that area. They have so many folks that are ready to help you with the lighting and the beautifying of your home. So give them a call. It's Laser Landscaping. Ask for Fidel at 240-516-4967.
Love makes you do crazy things. It's Real Talk with Dr. David Anderson. I'm Tony Penny, filling in for Dr. Anderson this week. On this Tough Topic Tuesday, we're talking about toxic relationships. Have you been in a toxic relationship before? Are you in one now? Are you not quite sure? Well, my guest, Aishia Grevenberg, is joining us today to talk about toxic relationships. She's a licensed clinical social worker and a therapist in private practice out in Las Vegas, Nevada. Earlier in the show, you mentioned how past trauma can lead to being in toxic relationships. Can you unpack that a little bit more?
I absolutely can. You can hear me okay, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So what happens in early childhood trauma, and 67% of Americans have experienced at least one form of trauma, at least one, 67%. So you know that number is much higher in the Black community.
Right.
And what happens with that type of experience is the child starts to feel as if they are bad. And that's what toxic shame is. And so, when we're growing up, adults would say, well, you should be shaming yourself, right? You made a mistake.
Yes.
Right. And you You made a mistake, and that is opposed to that feeling of shame actually is healthy, because that's going to help you to grow, to correct your behavior, and to have compassion for yourself and others. But toxic shame is when you feel that you are bad, not that you made a mistake or not that you did a bad thing, but that you are inherently bad and flawed and that there is something wrong with you. That's what happens to children when they are abused and neglected. And the most common form of abuse for children is neglect. It's not physical abuse, it's neglect.
Wow. You know, after a couple of days, and I had some time to kind of process what happened that night, it occurred to me that, you know, I'm a 53-year-old man. I live in a nice home in a nice part of town, and I've got a good job, and, you know, things are going well. And I was somewhat traumatized by that. Imagine the children who witness that sort of violence every day, how they must be processing this. And I thought, my goodness, I can't imagine what that must feel like for a, 6, 7, 8-year-old, and then how that impacts the way that they interact with other people, the relationships that they have with other people, with authority figures, things like that. So when people are experiencing that level of trauma, especially as a child or a young person, how does that manifest in relationships later in life? What kind of toll does that take?
So oftentimes it takes a toll that we don't see until there's this eruption. And so a child's mind is like a garden, like a fertile garden. And you think of all the different types of flowers and plants and trees that can grow in a child's mind. But trauma would be like a rock in the middle of that garden where everything needs to grow around the rock, right? And so what happens is that becomes a part of the child's blueprint on this is what life is. And Will Smith talks about growing up with domestic violence, severe domestic violence, and witnessing that. And so a child's brain, like this is normal. It becomes very normal for you to get upset and hit someone, for you to get upset and scream. That just becomes a part of the way you see life. You believe that it's normal. And that's what's so difficult to that knot in a child's mind, to untie that knot and help an adult see that this isn't healthy. This isn't how you handle conflict.
Wow. 888-432-7434 is our number. We're talking about toxic relationships with Aishia Grevenberg. Let's go to the phones. Robert is in Alexandria, Virginia. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'll tell you what, this is such a great conversation you two are having. Appreciate just the candidness, Dr. Aishia, just you as well. Everything that you're bringing to the table that you're talking about, it's right on point. I just wanted to make a comment about toxic relationships. One of the questions you asked, have you been in one? Are you in one right now? And I'm just another perspective. For me, I realized I was in a toxic relationship, and it was with a sibling, my brother. And it kind of even stems from what the doctor is speaking about, the childhood trauma, but I didn't realize it till after everything is basically where we communicate like we when we were a kid, and I didn't realize it till we were having the conversation, and I knew I was talking to my 14-year-old brother. He's over 40 right now, but that's what I felt like. I was talking to my 14-year-old brother, and he was telling me when I left and went to the military, and he's basically attaching that with everything else. But that goes with unforgiveness. When you have unforgiveness, if something looks like what that unforgiveness is, you automatically start attaching it to that, even though those people know nothing about what happened to you. That might even be what's going on with them. They may not even be ignoring you on purpose. They really could be busy, but again, you're hitting some great points on these topics. And I believe, me and my brother will be okay, but I just suggested to him, hey, I really trying to want to encourage you to get some help and see someone, but he's not going to hear it from me, really. He's not going to really listen to me right now, but I could see that was the case, and not to mention I have a degree in counseling, so I knew the signs that I'm seeing. Outside of that, though, there are people that you can be in those type of relationships that are toxic. One last point. The other thing that I saw that why it was toxic a relationship was when he was sharing with me some things of how he felt when I left and everything. He wanted me to feel a certain way. He started trying to control my reaction to what he was sharing. I'm like, hold on, wait, I'm being empathetic here. You don't get to control how I feel. I don't have to cry because you're crying right now. And so that was a sign for me to know that was toxic. And so what I'm trying to do is basically reestablish those boundaries. And it's up to him whether or not he really wants to be a part of my and my family's life, because the door's always open. But you can't come in with a toxic attitude and toxic behavior to be a part of our relationship right now.
Wow, great. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate that. Toxic relationships are not necessarily limited to romantic relationships, right? You can have familial relationships that are toxic. You can have work relationships that are toxic, right?
Absolutely. And that was such a good point to bring up. What happens when the trauma, whatever age or developmental stage that the trauma happens, the person is frozen.
They're frozen. Yeah, they're frozen in that moment.
They're frozen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's Real Talk with Dr. David Anderson. We will be right back to land this plane. It's Real Talk with Dr. David Anderson. I'm Tony Penny filling in for Dr. Anderson this week. It's been an incredible hour of conversation with Aishia Grevenberg, a therapist in private practice out in Las Vegas, as we talk about toxic relationships, the shame that's involved, the trauma that is involved in all of that. Aishia, just as we bring the show to a close, what should you do if you find yourself in a toxic relationship? Where can someone go to be safe? How should they handle that?
Well, I always say you have to get a therapist and you have to get a support group. There are 12-step support groups, Codependence Anonymous. There's support groups that can help. There's all types of hotlines you can call, but sitting down with a pastor, a counselor, anyone, just so that you can bear witness to someone. You can talk about what's going on with you. And so unless there is violence, I don't always recommend leaving right away, because if you leave and you're not sure, then that's going to erode your self-esteem, because you're going to go right back.
Right.
And then you're going to start to second guess yourself and your decision making. So it makes sense to leave on your own terms when you are ready and after you have thought about it and sat down with someone and really worked through your feelings and what your options are.
And so once you do leave, it's important really not to go back to that, no matter how comfortable it might seem, no matter how easy it might feel, right?
Absolutely. You have to do what we call no contact. I coach my clients on this, where you're not checking someone's social media. You block them. You don't talk to them, not on Christmas, not on their mama's birthday, nothing. Easter, nothing. This person is abusive. You cannot talk someone out of being abusive. There's not a conversation in the world that's going to do that. And so your responsibility is to take care of yourself by eliminating contact with this person. An abusive person is going to abuse everyone that comes into contact with them. You're not special. So keeping yourself safe. Go ahead.
And can toxic people change? Can that ever go away? Can they learn how to be a different person? Or is it something that is really just going to kind of be with them forever, even if it's on sort of a low level?
That's not going away. And I know that that's hard to hear, but Will Smith is 50-something years old. Do you think that's the first time that he's lost it like that he's lost his temper? The first time at 50? The first time.
At the Academy Awards.
Pattern? Right. Is this a pattern of behavior that this part of him, he needs to come to terms with that? And the idea of getting rid of it doesn't make sense. The idea of managing this part of himself, this part of his shadow, makes more sense. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like,
right.
It's not going anywhere.
He just has to be able to learn how to control it, how to manage it, how to make sure that he doesn't lose that level of control again. And certainly people in toxic relationships aren't always violent, but they do still have to understand that, A, they are indeed toxic, and B, what has made them that way, because something along the way, whether it was childhood trauma or learned behavior from people that you're in a relationship with who sort of reward that kind of toxic behavior, right? So you have to figure out what exactly it is that's causing this, and then how you can deal with that and how you can learn to get it under control so that you don't have either manipulative relationships or, God forbid, violent relationships. Aishia, thank you so much for spending time with us today. This has been fantastic. And Lord, as we close out the show, please give us wisdom and discernment to know that we need to leave relationships that aren't good for you and that don't glorify you. Amen and amen.
Help your children.
Aishia, thank you so much. That was awesome.
And my pleasure.